Richard, I remember that we might have done our first professional orchestral job together at playing Come in Burana, I think. So we've known each other a very, very long time.
An awful long time, back in the days of the dinosaurs. Yeah? Dawn of time.
That's right. So, Richard, you grew up in Nelson in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And can you tell us about that magical time?
It was a beautiful place to be brought up in, and it was quite rich culturally for a very small town. It had an orchestra and had, lots of arts input. So it worked out very well for me. What started me into music, I think, was polio. I've got a lot to thank polio for. It got me out of playing football, which was lovely, but it gave me a lot of time to sit. When you first come out, they put your legs in these plaster casts, so other than falling over, there's not a lot to do. And my mother came back from the war with a little portable radio, and on it I could get radio 2XN, Nelson, and on a good day when it wasn't raining I could get the national broadcaster from Wellington, and I would sit all day and just listen to the radio. There wasn't a lot of choice, and I would listen without any kind of bias. I would just listen to everything that came on, and radio in those days was different. We had the pop music of the day, they had an orchestral section, they had lots of music that I miss now called light music, which was Percy Faith and his orchestra. Great arrangements by great musicians of very pretty tunes, and lots of instrumental music. So I just sat and absorbed and had an inner life with music. For me it was a salvation. Even today I find I prefer to listen to music with a set of headphones than to go to a concert. For me it's an intensely personal thing, but I built up a really strong relationship with music. It became a huge part of my life. And when my parents became the caretakers of Nelson Intermediate School, I had the thrill of going there for the term and then going back and helping them clean it in the holidays. But one of the side benefits was there was collections of the Reader's Digest classics in one of the rooms and a record player, and I just started to listen and listen and listen. And I remember the first piece that grabbed my attention was Ride of the Valkyries, way back then. I don't listen to much Wagner now, but that was one of the ones that caught my attention. And I think the other one was Eroica Symphony. And in the same area I found a Dolmesh recorder and one of those books, Teach Yourself to Play Recorder in 3 minutes. And because I'd listened to music for so long, it seemed patently obvious to me. I used to sit in my little tree house. My father wouldn't allow me to bring it into the house. And I taught myself to read and to play a recorder. So it seemed no problem. It seemed an obvious thing to do. And when I went to the intermediate school, one of the great unsung people, Bruce Aitchison, had a recorder orchestra there, which introduced so many young people to music. It was a marvellous thing. But by the time I got there, I was the best recorder player in the school, which wasn't difficult because most of them were still puzzling as to how to put it together, which, given that the Dolmesh comes in one piece, is a worry in itself. So that's what started it, that time in Nelson, and then I had the choice of either playing the double bass or the clarinet, and we didn't have a car, so we went for the clarinet. And I've often thought that's one of the great bad decisions I made in my life. I would have enjoyed the bass tour. I had big hands, and I would have enjoyed the role. I would have enjoyed being at the back, and being part of it. But the clarinet became the instrument, and it started the whole process. It took
so
me
you
out
started off on a Boozy and Hawkes region?
No, it was a Selma. It was a Selma. Yeah, it was not a great clarinet. It was not something that's sought after these days.
Something we've never had this conversation, but I started off on the same instrument and it was appalling.
Yeah, it was shocking, but who knows,
Yes.
And then I think I saved up my gas station money and I bought a match pair of the lowest of the Boozy and Hawkes range. And
the Edgeware.
that could have been it, I think. That could have been it, yeah. An A and a B flat. And I had an O'Brien Crystal number 5 mouthpiece with a number 4 reed on it. That's what I used to play. I dug it out a few years ago, tried to play it. It was like blowing up a truck tire. I mean, there was so much resistance in that thing, you know. I can't believe I ever played it, but I did.
So did you have a clarinet teacher?
I did, sort of. I had a very well-meaning guy called Harold Crow, and he played a bit of flute, and he did a little bit of itinerant teaching in the schools. And he was a lovely guy, meant well, but he didn't really know much about the instrument. So I was largely self-taught, which was, you know, was problematic. It really wasn't until I got to Los Angeles with Vic Morosco that I actually started to build a foundation. And that was late in life. That was in my mid-20s. So I had some wonderful things thanks to another unsung hero of New Zealand music, Frank Oxley, and a lovely man called Heaton Drake. They arranged for me to go across and study with Frank Gurr when I was learning to play the Mozart Concerto with the School Music Orchestra. And that, of course, was just a huge experience. I mean, he is one of the most wonderful people that ever trod the face of the earth, you know.
So Frank Gurr, a Kiwi,
Yep.
who played for many years as the principal clarinet in the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra.
Yeah, he was one of the most beautiful human beings, the most generous, wonderful human beings. He used to pick me up in his Mini from the airport, drive me up. We'd have about a 2-hour lesson, which he'd smoke a packet of cigarettes. Then his wife would feed me. Then he'd drive me back to the airport, all for $10 or something. You know, he gave me an A clarinet. He was the most generous, you know, he was just an example for life of the kind of human being you would like to be. There's been a few of those. There was him, Frank Oxley, who's, you know, very under-recognised, and Don Burrows when I came out here. And people that just were so generous and so supportive that, you know, you just would like to have them as a role model for life. And I had some other great teachers, but those were the people that stood out as amazingly warm, wonderful humans.
So when you finished in Nelson, you came down to Christchurch, Canterbury University, to do a music degree there.
That's correct. That's right.
And so, how was that?
That I learned a lot about life being there at a university, being, you know, from a small town and an only child. I learned a lot about life. I learned a lot about music too, but not necessarily in the university itself. But I sang in the madrigal choirs. I played in terrible free-form groups. You know, really wide experience of music, and I did learn a certain amount at the university. I know that when I came down there, I was shocked because I met you and Keith Spragg and Debbie Rawson, people who could really play the instrument, and I realised how little I really knew about the instrument. It was, you know, I've always managed to be out of my depth. Completely out of my depth, struggling.
Well, I think that I need to put this on record. Actually, you played incredibly well.
You're very kind.
No, you did. I think you're completely underrating your ability. I mean, the thing is, the sign of a good musician is someone who knows what they can't do, and I think that was your problem. Because you were terrific.
Yeah, it was. I would have loved to have had Anton Radajek, you guys had, didn't you? And I think he would have been a good teacher for me in that he would have made sure that I had a foundation, because up until that point, you know, really, I worked hard at the instrument, but I wasted so much time because I practiced in the same 3 keys I was comfortable in. You know, I played what I knew. Probably not the brightest boy. So, you know, I missed lots of opportunities and would have done with some real discipline and a good solid foundation. So I had to go back and rebuild that later in life.
So you finished at Canterbury University, and you had been, as I started the interview, we played in the Christchurch Symphony Orchestra together.
You did, yeah. And under the terrifying Vancho Chubdowski.
That's right. And you had already developed a technique that you might have forgotten that you had, which was playing and eating a very large peppermint at the same time and blowing through the middle of it.
I remember sitting next to Keith Spragg and just thinking, how can anyone play the clarinet that well? I mean, he was just remarkable, you know, and fearless, and yeah, just a natural clarinet player, you know. And I found it terrifying playing with the orchestra, really. You know, I really found it quite frightening.
Well, I'm surprised you mentioned the conductor. I don't think I ever saw the conductor.
No. Didn't miss much.
So from Christchurch?
So well, when I was there, I started, when I was in the university, actually, I went to a dusty corner of the university library and I found two jazz albums. I found Kind of Blue and The Best of John Coltrane. And I relieved the library of the responsibility of storing those and took them home and played them until the grooves were worn out. And I thought, I really have to know more about this music. So curiosity has always been the driver. So I bought a saxophone. For about £100, I think I bought a Selmer Mark VI, having no idea, Selmer Mark VI tenor, that it was a valuable instrument. And it had a burglass and metal mouthpiece on it that somebody had worked on with a grindstone. So every time I tried to play it, it just squeaked. And I thought, gee, that saxophone's a difficult instrument to play. So I swapped it for a student model Yamaha with a friend, and it was in such bad condition it went to about G before it started to leak. You know, if you squeezed so hard that blood oozed under your nails, you could get a C, you know, on a good day.
Oh, you do tell a good story.
So I started listening to and you know, attempting to play jazz, and the chance to audition for the jazz course with Don Burrows came up. So I cheated. I copied Charlie Parker solo for the blues, and then I copied a Paul Desmond solo in the wrong key because my tape recorder was running a semitone slow. So the poor devils who had to do the audition tape with me was Stu Buchanan and Ted Meagy, you know, those guys.
Yeah.
They had to play this thing, you know, a semitone lower than what they were used to playing it in, just the fact that I only knew it in this key. And that was enough to get me into the con. And I think I learnt more in the first 6 months in the jazz course at the con about Western music than I'd learnt at 4 years in university. I just, you know, I gobbled it up. And I mean, I once again was hopelessly out of my depth, just, you know, just struggling to keep up. But I loved the music, and I just absorbed everything that came up. And there was so much opportunity in those days. There were so many good people. They brought people out from America. I learned so much from David Baker, people like that. Just, you know, I would fill books with it, and, you know, and I'm still applying it now at this stage of my life, still finding things from those days. Probably the most valuable thing I learned is what I was not going to be a jazz musician, but I love the music.
So why did you come to that conclusion?
I came to it too late, and I came to it as a reading musician. I didn't trust my ears. And sadly, when around that stage they were teaching lots of chord scale theory as part of the course, and of course I latched onto that, and I would use my brain instead of my ears. So I was playing catch up to such an extent that I really couldn't cover that ground. And I think there are certain qualities you need to be a jazz musician. You know, you need to have a fantastic oral memory. You need to be able to think on your feet. You know, and you need to be comfortable being the centre of attention in front of a crowd of people. None of those things really describe me. But I love the music, and I learnt a lot about jazz, and I think I write well for jazz musicians, and you know, I can teach young people how to prepare to become a jazz musician. But to do it, you have to just do it.
Can I just ask you a question? Because of your sort of dual background, if you like, do you think that you are better at teaching young people how to play jazz compared to a lot of other teachers because of that background?
I think I am in some ways, because I can vividly remember the process of learning, and I'm aware of the pitfalls, you know. Certainly, you know, Phil Woods is right. There's no way that you can be taught to play jazz, you know. You just have to do it. But in today's world, jazz is such a complex and vast art form that, you know, you need help. You need help to cut corners and get there in a hurry. So you need to understand harmony and how it works. And you need to understand the points of style so that you can begin to transcribe and you can begin to copy. The great advantage of places like the Con is that you can be surrounded with like-minded people, and be enthused by them and learn from them and get opportunities to play. And in our world, it's not easy for a jazz musician to play at any time in their career, because it is not a popular art form anymore. It is, it's a boutique form of music. So, the con has a very valuable role, and the standard of the musicians coming out of there is breathtaking compared to the years when I was there, really. And they've got some wonderful teachers, Andrew Robertson, people like those who are, stellar musicians.
Yes. And so from Sydney, you went to America?
I went to America. I went to study with a guy called Victor Morosco, who I'd got on through Cole Lockton, who had been my teacher. And that was an epiphany. That was the first time that I was able to go to somebody and say, listen, I can't slur down from D to G across the instrument. Why is that? And he would have the answer. And he set about giving me a foundation and lots of wonderful information. Since there are things I've rethought, I don't entirely agree with things, embouchure and tongue position, articulation on the saxophone, but by far the bulk of what he taught me was everything I needed to know. And I also studied there with an old New York Jewish guy called Avi Fraser, who used to teach a lot of the film writers, and I studied counterpoint with him. He was a student of Schoenberg's, and I remember going along to my first lesson. He was very gruff, smoked a cigar, and he was in his 70s. And I took a little cassette of things that I'd written, which I thought were rather clever, and I played about 4 seconds. He said, turn that off. So go to the piano and do a modulation from C to F sharp. So I fumbled, I'm never a good piano player, I fumbled through this thing, and he says, right, we're going back to the beginning. So we went back to 16th century counterpoint in minims, breves and semi-breves, and he made me do it in soprano, alto, tenor and baritone clefs. And I would, enthusiastic, I'd come in with, 20 or 25, examples, and he'd sit there with his pencil and go, no, 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 no. And, I was quite depressed by the end of it. But he really took me apart and made me go right back to the very basics.
And what sort of time when you felt as though he was pleased with your work?
Not really, but later on, other people went to study with him and said that he had kept some of the fugues I'd written as examples. So it was that very, very gruff, style of teaching, but I persisted through it, and I learnt so much. I mean, I learned about music, I learned to write music, and I learnt how, music works through him. And I would have loved to stay longer and study with him for years, but I ran out of money, and so I only got about 6 or 7 months in Los Angeles. Yes. But it was a time for me where I just uploaded so much information. It was wonderful.
And from Los Angeles?
Then I came back home.
To New Zealand?
No, I came back to Australia,
okay.
Back to Sydney,
yes.
And I started working in the theatre. I think the first thing I did when I came back was Cats, 2 long years of Cats. So that established me as a doubler, and it also, allowed me to live and buy instruments and do the things you have to do as a musician.
So how does someone survive 2 years of playing a musical?
You leave and come back was one of the best things. I must say it's not an easy process. I find it very difficult. You would play up to the rehearsals really well, and then it was a struggle from then on to try and keep that standard. And there were often difficult things. There was usually something in each performance every night which would be close to your limit of what you could do. I remember that one was a high clarinet part at the beginning, and then you put that down and you had 4 bars to play a whisper quiet top E on the flute. That always got the blood up. But yeah, it did become tedious. And really that was not phenomenal music to play. It wasn't like playing West Side Story every night or something. And even the great music like that, with that many repetitions, when you play hundreds of shows, it does become predictable.
And it must affect your mental well-being.
Yeah, well, it's nice being able to make enough money to pay the rent. I mean, that's a big consideration.
Absolutely.
And you're working with some really wonderful musicians. I mean, the people that you work with are highly accomplished musicians, so they're good company to be around. And you just learn strategies to deal with it. The biggest, I think, frustration with it was you spent so much time on the show, and you would always work on whatever your weakest double was. And for me, it was the flute. That was the last one that came to me. So that you would work on that to the detriment of your other instruments. There was always that constant frustration that you couldn't really, spend the time you wanted with the instruments. And it's really since I've retired and gone to the mountains that I've been able to sit down and just concentrate on the saxophone and work on the concert repertoire for it. And I'm a lot better saxophone player than I've ever been in my life, from having the time just to concentrate and not be distracted by 10 instruments or whatever it was. There's always something that you were apprehensive about playing, whether it was the piccolo or...
So do you still play the flute and the piccolo? Or?
No, I don't. No, I've taken the opportunity to put them away.
Yes.
Yeah. So I just play the saxophones now and the clarinets, and principally the alto saxophone, just because it's the saxophone I've got that I like to play the most. It's just the best instrument that I've got of all the instruments. And I still work on the clarinet, and it's starting to show signs of age now, like its owner.
So we can't jump to the present because there's a lot in between. So you started teaching as well.
I did. I've always taught.
Yes.
I never trusted the music business,
Yes.
and because I always thought it's the first thing that's going to go if the economy crashes. So I always kept Plan B, and so I think when I was young I would have taught principally just to have an income, but as I got into it, I started to realise that I was not bad at it, and I started to realise that it was a significant thing to do with your life. Being a musician is largely a self-centred occupation. I mean, people benefit from what you do, but it's you versus you, and you're dealing with your own development, own survival. Whereas being the teacher, it's an outgoing of energy, so it's in some ways it fulfills that need in your life, to be useful to people. And I found, that you do make big changes in people's lives. Even somebody who's not that particularly keen to learn, you can show them that there is more to life than the narrow band of music that they're being presented with, in the day-to-day thing. So you can open doors to people's lives. Music does so much. We all know about the how it affects the brain and the ability to learn, and that's been used a lot as a selling point for it. But, for people, it can teach them the whole business of self-discipline, of setting goals and achieving them. Socially, it can make doors open for people because they've got things in common with other people. In terms of self-esteem, it can give people who are a bit removed from society something which is their thing that they've got to sell. It's just got so many benefits, and there is so much that you can do, even in a situation where the students are not particularly motivated. For me, the big thing is, I think the art of listening is being lost. Music is so ubiquitous. It's everywhere you go. It's in every shop. It's on the telephone. It's behind commercials. Young people walk around with earbuds in their ears, so they're constantly bombarded with music, but they don't listen. And I remember when I first started out, religiously giving each student originally a cassette tape and then a CD with 20 or 30 examples of the instrument they were playing. If it was alto saxophone, from Marcel Mule through to David Sanborn. And I'd say, look, take this away, listen to this, and whatever you particularly like, I'll make you another CD of those. 1 in 20 would have even listened to the CD, and then of those, a mere handful would have given me a name of someone that they would have wanted to imitate. So that's been the battle for me, is just to get people to listen again, to listen to music. It was such a big part of my life. It was, you know, the salvation, I suppose. And I think most people today have the musical diet of a packet of twisties, you know, where we live in this cornucopia of so much wonderful music, and people are starving mentally, you know, for musical sustenance. So a big part that led me to the Teacher on Tap books and doing the audio component of that was to try and get young people to listen, to try and get something that would catch their attention, and once they heard that, they may follow that, you know, whether it was a piece of Baroque music, whether it was a piece of jazz music, or whether it was a Latin music, and, you know, if they liked it, it might trigger an appetite to follow that music and learn that there is so much more to it than, you know, what is pumped out in the media.
So the Teacher on Tap series, which is a wonderful series that you produced yourself, when did you start that approximately?
I started that about 1999 with Peter Dorich. So when I studied with Morosco, I took a tape recorder with my lessons. We have about a 2-hour lesson, and I'd come home and I would transcribe from the tape all the information from the lessons and come up with quite a bulky document with all that information. And I met Peter Dorich at the time, and he was working on a similar project. So he said, let's combine our resources. And I was keen not to have young people go through what I went through, was not having a foundation. So, you know, just playing around and playing a few minutes, you know, actually building a foundation so that the method was like yours, you know, it was constructed on a foundation, and, you know, everything you learnt related to what you learnt. And I also wanted to have a big audio component. I wanted people to listen. I know for me, I did all my early exams and things like that without actually hearing how the music sounded with the accompaniment until, you know, a couple of days before the exam, you know, Brahms sonata or something like that. I was shocked to hear the piano part with it, you know.
Do they have piano parts?
Yeah. So, yeah, I wanted them to use their ears to copy. I mean, you know, it's like saying something, you know, paint an orange, and they've never seen one. But my students don't listen to the saxophone, you know. They just don't listen to this. And it's very easy for them not to hear it in today's world, because really it's not well represented in the popular music, you know. And if you play the oboe or the clarinet or the bassoon, then you really have got to, you know, you really have to dig to hear the instrument being played. So that was it. And to put in the back, you know, put in the accompaniment tracks where they have to play in time, they have to play in tune. It just seemed to me to be what was missing from a lot of the material that was around in those days. You know, the tune today was a great tutor, actually.
I agree.
You know, it was a perfectly good tutor if you'd had that audio component to it, just to, you know, help a person gain a concept of the instrument they were playing. That would be more than enough if you were a motivated person, you know.
Absolutely. That's what I learned from it. I expected that from
I
it.
did too.
It seemed to work, didn't it?
The bandman tutor.
Mr. Paul C. Hepforth or something.
That's right.
So many years of doing musicals and many years of very productive teaching. And I just have to remind you of a conversation we had when we were both incredibly young. And we were both teaching at the Crochet School of Music on a Saturday morning, and we had classes. You know, we used to have gaps in between, and we had this conversation where you were sort of obviously had a bad class, and you said, you know, this teaching is ruining my playing. I think now that we're both a bit older, we actually have learned quite a lot from teaching.
We have. Yeah, actually, I mean, it you know, it really does do a lot for your playing.
Yes.
And I mean, I would like to have a balance in my life.
Yes.
I don't think I would have been happy just being a teacher and not being involved in the process of making music, you know.
Yes.
And I wouldn't have felt right, you know,
Yes.
teaching somebody that I didn't actually do it myself.
Yes.
But no, I mean, there was that old thing, if you play tennis with a bad opponent, you know, your own game suffers, you know. I suppose there's that aspect to it. But no, now on the whole, I enjoy teaching. And if the student is willing to meet me halfway and actually make an effort, that's all I require. I don't require them to, you know, achieve any amazing standard, just to move forward and, you know, do the best that they can.
Yes. So, and you've done so much ensemble writing as well, which is just fantastic. Because you have notated a lot of sort of music, well, composed music that sounds authentically jazzy, if I can use the rather crass word, but it's very well notated, and it's, you know, it really is quite unique, I think.
I started writing for, I remember, I think it was St Pius or somewhere, they used to give you group lessons, and you'd just have these poor young people in a room who couldn't play the instrument, you know, with all playing, you know, a unison line. So I used to go away and write little arrangements of popular tunes and jazz standards and things, and they loved it and responded to it. And then as I went through, I had more groups, and I found that I could just write things that had a reasonably demanding line for the more advanced players, and I could keep the inner parts very simple for the less, you know, advanced players, and they could have the joy of just playing, you know, which is what it's all about, you know, just playing together, being in a group, you know, because you've done all that with all your, you know, with all your workshops, and you know, got people together and playing, and just introduce them to the joy of playing together, which is what it's really all about. And as a, you know, melody line instrument player, that's not always easy. So that led me into it, and then I've got a bit more self-indulgent as time has gone on, and I've written things, you know, that are more complex and aimed at musicians of, you know, higher musical standard. But I enjoy it probably more than anything else in life, is writing music, you know.
And then of course you've been doing your track recording videos.
That's right.
Which your dog has organised.
Yes, that's right. He's very good.
Yeah, very good. He's a great sound engineer. So do you enjoy doing that?
I do enjoy doing that. And the videos, that we live in a world that's very visual.
Yes.
You know, we really do. You know, the cult of celebrity now has sort of overtaken music. But so I've always put up the scores with the background music, so that a teacher potentially can see the score go through and hear the music and think, oh, that could be useful to me.
Yes.
But then, even then, that's too much for some people, and unless there's actually somebody there doing something on the screen in front of them. So that's when I started making the little videos. And yeah, I enjoy that. It's fun.
They're very taxing to actually playing time and tune with yourself.
It is, actually. It is. It is surprising.
It's creative. I mean, it's a new sort of it's a new art form, isn't it?
It is.
It came to its peak in COVID.
And you know, I'm very, you know, I do very basic. I don't do any of the editing and adding all the gloss to it, but it still gets it out there to people. And it's funny. I was looking to put something up on YouTube yesterday, and I came across a little segment of two young people in Bratislava or somewhere playing one of my duets, and they'd filmed it. It was beautiful. They played so well. They're both about this tall.
Isn't it rewarding?
Yeah, it is rewarding.
It's fantastic.
It is.
It makes your day, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Yes.
It does.
And especially if they ordered it rather than photocopied.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure they ordered it, but I'm just pleased they're playing it.
So now you use the R word. You say retired, but actually, it strikes me that you're now doing the things that you want to do.
That's pretty much it. Yeah.
Yes, so
I can't. I would never retire. I would go insane. Yeah. So no, I still practice the instrument most days, or the instruments most days, and I write every day, and then record the things that I've written where possible, where it's written for that instrumentation. So yeah, I'm far from retired, but I'm not doing the things that I dislike so much.
Yes. And
I'm certainly not doing the business of getting it in the car and driving for 2 hours and trying to park, and all of the things that
carrying all those instruments.
Yeah, carrying the instruments around and dealing with politics and all those kind of things that wear thin after a while. Yeah.
And tell me, you live in the Blue Mountains.
I
and
do.
You said before we started that it reminds you of your time when you were growing up in Nelson.
I think it does. I think there's a bit of a desire to go back to your childhood as you get older or something, but it's beautiful. It's extremely beautiful. Extremely quiet at night. The air is beautiful. The temperatures are similar to what I remember as a young person. The space, it's not cramped. And there's a wonderful community of highly intelligent, interesting people. So it's heaven.
And Richard Percival, who was good at so many things, it seems to be you found your absolute calling with gardening.
I love gardening, yeah, I do so. My mother used to garden, and she used to make me garden on Saturdays, and I hated it, absolutely hated it. And then later in life, I started just to fool around a little bit, and yeah, gardening is a great pleasure. It's a great contrast to the other things that you do, and it's, yeah.
So when you garden, do you listen to music at the same time?
No. It's funny, I don't listen to music much at all. I don't listen to music when I drive the car. If I listen to music, I listen to music. I try not to have it as a background to another activity. Yeah. That's just me. And Michael Scott's the same. You know, we go and have a cup of coffee together. We can't go anywhere with this background music in the restaurant because you just can't stand it. You know?
Cranky old man, that's your problem. Richard, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark.